Welcome to Mach 10 Sports. Glad you could join us for this July 25th, 2023 episode. We only got 5 Saturdays left, guys, to week 0, to week toe meat leather. We only got 5 Saturdays. That first one's going to lead off Hawaii going to Vanderbilt. We're going to have some action in Nashville. It's not far, guys. We're here. It's here. It's here. And we only got about a week and a half left till fall camp gets underway. That's when some real football starts. I know it's not the 2 days it used to be, but pads will be cracking. But it'll be a good time. We'll have a lot of position battles finalized. There are a lot of interesting, intriguing position battles we'll get to. I'm going to give you my SEC predictions in about 2 weeks. It's going to be the Thursday before week 0. I want to get into fall camp. I don't want to give predictions before I have to, because I want to learn a little bit about Alabama's quarterback position battle, LSU's offensive line, defensive line, some key injuries maybe happening. Treat it a little bit like a fantasy draft. I want to have as much information, wait till the 11th hour to pick as possible. But again, South Carolina's starting fall camp next Friday. Some will be similar to that as well. But again, I hope you all are all having a great summer. Great summer. Getting your beach trips, get those last-minute beach trips in before you are just glued to your couch, heading into a stadium, tailgating with your buddies. College football season, it is here. We're ready to rock and roll. I'm ready to bring you some information, ready to bring you some good news from Mach 10 Sports. Right now, staff's heading to the last week of recruiting before it goes dead here. Everybody's kind of having their last big barbecue, last big recruiting event. Analyst support staffs, offensive and defensive staffs getting together, getting their practice scripts ready as we head to the first week of fall camp starting next week, into next week. And then probably some hideaway type retreats that coaches have where most of the full-time guys, all the full-time coaches, analysts, support staff, and probably a person or two from the recruiting staff go. It's kind of state of the union. Everybody goes over their critical factors. I like to call them critical factors, non-negotiables, what they're going to be running on defense, what they're going to be running on offense, the evaluation process. Always thought when I was at Georgia, we did the best job of actually making it really mean something. Everyone getting up there from a presentation that, hey, we're going to tweak some things in the evaluation process here, guys. This is the way it's going to go. Just so you know, we'll be updated in the pipeline. Also, from a standpoint on offense and defense, they're just going over their core beliefs. Everybody getting on the same page. What's the goals this year? Kind of like a little team runner. It used to be overnight. Some teams do, but a lot of it would just be like a day and a half trip. Guys get out early on the last few days to be with their family. That's really what this week is. You got recruiting, finishing up the big barbecues, the big summer events before it goes dead. The high school kids start getting into their practice. They're with their teams. The coaches start investing in their teams. One of the best things the NCAA did, they have not done a lot of stuff, but the NCAA did a good job of making August dead, where the coaches and the staffs, the programs can really just focus on their team, their guys. Because it used to be 3 or 4 years ago, you used to have to be managing recruits while you're also in the middle of fall camp. It was a lot. So they did that. But again, that's where we're at. Last weekend, wrapping up recruiting, some hideaways, some retreats, and then just getting ready for fall camp next week, man. I can barely get in touch with any of my buddies that are really on staff right now, just kind of locking in. They're getting those last few days situated in recruiting, those last few days situated with their families, and also getting the ducks in the row for what they're going to try to accomplish here going to fall camp. So that's where we're at right now. Let's get right into it. Let me tell you about some other stuff we're going to do today. It's a real meat and potatoes type show. I mean, right now we're going to have Graham Coffey, co-founder and publisher of DogCentral.com, will join the show to discuss. Got a little bit of a tiff with the Tennessee fan base, Big Orange Nation, Big Vol Nation, in regards to Tennessee not recruiting to an elite championship level. I'm going to give you my thoughts. I'm going to bring him on the show, let him give you his thoughts. I thought it was a good argument going back and forth. Graham's a real knowledgeable guy over there at DogCentral.com. We'll get him on in just a minute. Then we'll discuss who really has a chance this year in the SEC to make the playoffs. Everybody's going to be like, well, maybe if Arkansas, KJ Jefferson, Heisman contention, Tennessee, Joe Milton, guys like that. I mean, if they could really, South Carolina, who really has a real shot to make the playoffs? It's only a handful. It's a handful of teams that really can go into the season being like, you know what, we got a shot to make the playoffs and a chance to win the national championship. So we're going to get into that. But real quick, before we get Graham in, I just wanted to Vegas released the odds today for Alabama's starting quarterback position. As you can probably guess, Ty Simpson is the leader in the clubhouse right now. Ty Simpson at plus 105. Tyler Buckner at plus 140. Jalen Milroe coming in at plus 300. I think all three guys here have a real shot. They're all going to be obviously, unless you've been living under a bridge, Tommy Rees is the new OC. I think all three of these guys really factor into the RPO game, and their strengths lean to what Tommy Rees and Nick Saban want to do. So I think from a standpoint of you're going to see all three of these guys have an opportunity to make more plays, more design runs with the quarterback than you're going to see previously with guys like Tua, Mac Jones, or Bryce Young. Bryce Young was more of an improvision guy. This stuff that you're going to see from Tommy Rees I think all three of these guys could run this. Tyler Buckner, Ty Simpson, and Jalen Milroe could all run this in their system. I think they'll be fine from that standpoint. I think this is really going to come down to who the staff trusts the most and who can win the team over. When I say a lot of it sounds cliche, but winning the team over has always been big for Nick Saban. Who has the locker room? Sounds cliche, but it's really important who the guy's going to follow. And I think that's one aspect that's really keeping Jalen Milroe in this race right now. He took the guys down to Florida, his receivers, working with them. He's been in the program for a little bit. Ty Simpson as well, but Tyler Buckner's new guy. But even in spring, came in after the spring because Alabama didn't feel good about that quarterback room. But I don't give them as much flack for it. They're just raising the floor of that quarterback room. I think that's fine. But I think it makes sense with Ty Simpson right now being at plus 105, the odds to win the starting quarterback position in Alabama. That's where I feel like it's going right now. But I do know one thing. Nick Saban's not going to forget about those turnovers that Jalen Milroe had. I think that's what's going to ultimately hold him back. In the back of his head, he's always going to be like, man, is he going to go look good for 6 or 7 weeks? Then when we actually go on the road to College Station, is he going to really struggle on the road? Is bad Jalen going to come out at times? I think that's Nick Saban. I don't know if he'll be able to fully get over those turnovers you saw in the Texas A&M game, which I think is really interesting just to think about. But Vegas coming out with the starting quarterback odds at the University of Alabama. Just wanted to bring that up real quick. I'm leaning towards Ty Simpson. I'll give you my predictions here in the next week and a half, 2 weeks on really who's going to win that Alabama quarterback position. But I'll lean that right now, and the Vegas odds back that up. Then I think Buckner would be second. I think Milroe's a distant third. And I think the only thing keeping him in it right now in this quarterback race is I think he has the team. I think the team supports Jalen Milroe and believes in him. I think they believe in him. But Nick Saban, the ultimate decision maker, he does not throw quarterbacks out there that turn the ball over and put his defense in bad spots. I don't think he's ultimately getting over that. I think Ty Simpson's going to ultimately win that job. He's sneakier athletic than people are giving him credit for. And I think all three guys can be weapons in the RPO system and be intricated in the quarterback runs more so than you've seen Alabama in a while, just because Tommy Rees, him and Nick Saban are on the same page with how they want to utilize this new offense. But let me get Graham on with us real fast before we go into that. Let me send him the link. We will get on. Send it over. Just waiting on him. So again, Graham coming on. We're going to talk a little overall Tennessee recruiting. Are they recruiting at the proper level right now to go win a championship? Not go win 8, 9, 10 games. I think they're there at that. I think they're doing that. Heupel's offense is proven he can score. He's going to score. He's always had quarterbacks. Even going back to his Missouri days, Drew Lock, Mackenzie Milton, Dylan Gabriel at UCF. Obviously, Hendon Hooker. I think it's a product of the system. I think they're going to always be solid on offense. They are. It's just the name of the game. It's their product, but it's what he does. I've given up hope they're ever going to have an average offense, but it has to start on the line of scrimmages. And that's why I'm on the line of scrimmage. That's why I'm bringing Graham in. I saw he's making points on social media. Just wanted to bring him in, let him discuss that. And I'll give you my 2 cents as well. But while we're waiting on him here, again, staffs, in case you join me late, staffs are really working, trying to finish it off some the recruiting background. Last barbecue event usually incorporate a little bit of a pool party a little bit. When I was at Texas A&M, Terry Price, God rest his soul, he was a barbecue king. He'd be out there from 6 a.m. on till the rest of the day at the pool party at the apartment complex across the street from the facility in College Station. We'd do all that stuff. We would have a blast. He'd be cooking all day. It'd be a pool party. Just kind of puts a bow on the spring-summer recruitment for these SEC teams and teams really across the nation. Just kind of polishing it up before they really turn that page and flip to the 2023 season. Because next week, I don't care what stats tell you, recruiting goes out the door. They pull enter Dan Mullen, and recruiting goes out the door for the next month. Like I said, the best thing the NCAA did was make the month of August dead. Best thing it did. Let the recruiting staffs reset the button, get on the same page, and let the coaches really spend time with players who are on the current roster. It was always big to me. That was always big to me. Trigger ASU, go Dogs. I'm with you, man. Go Dogs. Worked there from 15 and 16. I enjoyed my time in Athens. Had a blast. Also, I have some fan. I meant to mention it earlier before the show. We'll have some fan questions at the end of the show as well. And remember, after Graham gets on, we're going to talk about what SEC teams have a real, honest shot at making the 2023 college football playoff. We'll bring that. Graham will be on here in just a minute. But yeah, I mean, right now, if you're a support staff member in college football, you're getting all your script sheets. You're getting all your practice scripts. Hey, what do we want to work on day 1, day 2, day 3 install? Remember, you got to have so many shorts and pad days, acclimation periods before you can come in. My favorite part of fall camp was always the first scrimmage. And then really, honestly, a little bit the second scrimmage too, but that's usually about a week and a half later. That's where you're finally starting to separate who's going to win position battles, really that second scrimmage. Coaches aren't grading that hard on the first one. But the second one, that was always the one you usually that's where you could separate the top 40, top 50. I always talk about top 40. It's not about your first 22, but your top 40. Go listen to Brian Kelly at the SEC Media Days this past week. He was always talking about the depth chart. The depth chart. They're 22 and talking to guys at LSU. They can compete with anybody. But he was worried about just the overall depth more than any just specific position. And I think with the transfer portal and stuff, that's for a lot of teams. But here's Grant joining us right now. Let me get him on. Grant, what's up, baby?
Not much. How are you doing, Dave?
Doing well, man. You're live with us. Appreciate you joining on, guys. If you don't know already, we got Graham Coffey, co-founder and publisher at dogcentral.com, joining us. Grant, let's get right to it before we get to some SEC Media Days questions. Tell us a little bit about the little tiff you had with the Tennessee fan base, Big Orange Nation, the other day about while we're on here. Is Tennessee really recruiting at a championship level? I think it's kind of past the recruiting a good level. I think me and you both agree on that. But from a championship level on both sides of the line of scrimmage in the trenches, I brought you on because I follow your stuff, and I really liked your take. I know a lot of people were killing you, especially Tennessee fans, for that. But I agree with you. I think there's a big difference over the last 48, 72 hours, just going back, looking at their classes they signed in 23, who they got committed now, and what Kirby and Georgia were doing in their, 17, 18 classes about the same time.
Absolutely.
It just looks night and day difference. You tell me.
I often talk in recruiting about empty calories. And you see classes sometimes that are ranked in the top 5 or top 10 or top 15 by the services. But when you go through them, there's not maybe as much substance as you will find with a class that a Georgia or an Alabama has put together. Even Texas A&M's class from a couple of years ago, there was a lot of talk over how they landed those prospects. But if you look across the line of scrimmage, a lot of elite players. And my general take on all college football recruiting is that you can find elite skill player prospects, maybe not elite, but you can find very good above replacement level skill player prospects, way down the board. Ladd McConkey was a 3-star for Georgia. A.D. Mitchell was a 3-star for Georgia. Like, if you do your homework and you evaluate as a program, you will find guys who can play receiver in the SEC or any other conference, right? There's only a small handful of elite line of scrimmage prospects in any cycle. And, you look at Georgia's class right now, they've got 6 offensive linemen committed. A couple of those guys are 3-stars that are going to be more project and built off potential. But some of those guys are going to come in and, they're going to be guys that can compete to be on the 2 deep in their freshman seasons and, probably start their sophomore or junior season. So you look at Tennessee's recruiting right now, I think they're up to 8th in the country, but a lot of those empty calories that we were just talking about, right? Like there's wide receiver prospects. There are guys that play further away from the football. They just got a commitment from a linebacker who's a home state guy that I think they beat Ohio State out for, and
Yep.
they were excited about for good reason. But at the end of the day, I just think that the issues that Tennessee has is a program in terms of getting to where they want to go to compete with the Georgias and the other elite programs in college football and to compete for national titles. Getting receivers open isn't a problem in that offense, right? It's kind of a cheat code for that. And so you want to see them bulk up on the line of scrimmage and get to a spot where they can really go toe to toe in the trenches. And, yes, I think one thing Tennessee fans took issue with my comments was thinking that I was labeling them as like this pass happy offense. And they run the ball and they ran the ball effectively against most of their opponents last year. But you saw Georgia put 5 guys in the box and control their run just with 5 on 5. Right. And, any coach, any offensive coach will tell you, like, if that can happen, then you're going to have a long day because your opponent can sit back in the secondary and they're not going to be as stressed. And I think for Tennessee to get where they want to go, they've got to start getting some elite guys on both lines of scrimmage.
No, I agree completely on that. I mean, I'm looking at it right now. We both admit they're recruiting well.
Sure.
Finished 12th overall last year in the 23 class, 6th in the SEC because I'm calculating Oklahoma and Texas coming in too at this point. Because as you know, these classes that are coming in now, I mean, you're gonna be playing them in that league, so I'm gonna count them right now. And that's according to On3, and then 10th overall according to 247 and 6th nationally. 10th overall, 6th in the SEC, 247. So 6 across the board, it seems like. But just the defensive line overall, there's maybe one guy that it would maybe take on that defensive line. It's the Hobbs kid, if I remember right. If I'm looking at him, he's a guy I feel like it's kind of you could not take that guy. But across the board, there's really, I mean, I was looking at it for the guys that are 2 deep right now, and I think it's a decent. The guys going to be on their team next year, 2023 guys, like the Roman Harrison guys that are on their roster. 6 of the 8 are Pruitt guys that they recruited. That Eckler and Rodney Garner, give them credit, they've developed. They don't really have any dudes they've brought in yet. I know it's only 2 classes, but it is interesting, this next class, because you're looking from what Glenn Ellerby's doing on the offensive line for Tennessee. And Rodney Garner, I worked with him at Auburn. I think he's a great developer, recruits well, but they're just not getting those dudes. I mean, they're going to have to get guys like the Williams in the area, the Kamarian Franklin, Jordan Ross, Danny Okobe, guys like that to really take it to the next level. I mean, where's my list right now? I was looking at it earlier, but I mean, you know, Graham, these are just a few guys in the 2nd and 3rd classes that Georgia signed in the trenches for them, for Georgia in his first same time frame Tennessee's in right now with Heupel.
Sure.
Andrew Thomas, Isaiah Wilson, Devontae Wyatt, Jamari Sawyer, Quay Walker, Trey Hill, Azeez Ojulari, and Jordan Davis. I don't see anyone on Tennessee's offensive line or defensive line it looks like that.
No, we're not at all.
1% too, but I just was like, you go watch these guys, and I like the Shamarad Urolf. He's a solid guy. I don't think he's like a potential NFL all-league guy, though. I think he's a winnable plus guy. But after that, I don't really like – they're taking some guys that I don't even think Georgia's evaluated at offensive line. And that's not a knock Georgia. It's just Georgia's not wasting their time on that. But, man, it is interesting. They're getting the skill guys, the Mike Matthews guy, total winnable plus all-league guy. But like you said, those guys are a dime a dozen. It's like to win a championship, as you know, you got to win it on both lines of scrimmage, and I just don't think they're there yet.
No, and I think you look at their class for 2024, 18 commits right now, which is, a large percentage of who, what they'll finish with. And we're here in July, but you go down just the highest ranked players in the class, top 2 highest ranked players are wide receivers. Then you go cornerback, tight end, running back, quarterback. And then you finally get to your first offensive tackle, the Max Anderson kid out of Frisco, who I think is a good player. He's
another solid player. You're right.
Yeah, but you go down. The next offensive lineman that they have on their commitment list he's not ranked nationally, and then you get way down in here, and they've got some guys that they've taken who are not even top 100 in their position. Not top 100 prospects on the D line or on the offensive line, and I think that's not how you catch up to Georgia. And a lot of this kind of vitriol from Tennessee fans was sort of centered around talking about the Heupel system. And, I personally kind of have this belief that, like, if Tennessee does get to a spot where they are recruiting 5-star linemen across the board, that doing what they're doing on offense right now is maybe not the best way to maximize that talent. And that upset a lot of people because, I mean, look, every fan base wants to believe that, the staff they have right now and the system they're running right now is one that they can just continue trending up with to win a national title. But I think Heupel would have to evolve considerably if they were to sign, 5 stars and high-ranked 4 stars across the offensive line. Like, I don't think what they're doing right now in this rules-based system that says, hey, if the numbers are here, then we're going to toss it outside. And if they're here, then we're going to run it inside. Like, if you've got 5-star offensive linemen, then pound the ball up the middle until you force that defense to bring 6, 7, 8 guys in the box. And then you got Mike Matthews to run past everybody on the outside and, make things easier. But you saw what Georgia did to them last year and the year before, for that matter. Like, Hendon Hooker was a very good college quarterback last season, but he also, I think, was, very much in tune with and maybe at times constrained by the rules of that system. And I'm curious with Nico Iamaleava, 5-star prospect, I thought he might have been the most talented, highest ceiling quarterback in the 2023 cycle. Like, that guy's in your program now. Are you going to let him kind of color outside of the lines and use his talent to its maximum potential?
No, you're right. It would not shock me down the line. I think you would agree with this. Because I do think Tennessee's here to win 8, 9, 10 games. I think they're going to recruit well enough. The system proves it works. But I do think they're Tennessee fans, and I think maybe some people in general are going to be a little shocked at the lack of NFL numbers they're going to put down the line. Like, I don't think a lot of Jalen Hyatt's already getting a little negative feedback off the lack of ability to run a bunch of routes off the route tree. A lot of the stuff such outside the numbers, as you were just talking about.
Well, it doesn't.
I think the quarterback will be key. I think the quarterback will be key as well. Like you said, can they adjust to an NFL system? And also, I like Darnell Wright last year. He got drafted on the offensive line. But again, that wasn't a guy they recruited.
Right.
And this whole staff right here that I like to think about, not throwing them under the bus, but I got to UCF right after they left. There were just some position groups on both sides of the line of scrimmage, and he brought a lot of those same guys. Now, Randy Shannon was his defensive coordinator, so obviously Rodney Gardner wasn't on that staff, but Glenn Ellerby was. Little underwhelming recruiting class. Like, it was just almost a little bit of the low-hanging fruit. I'll coach them up. And it's, as you know, at this level in the SEC, I think it may benefit them a little bit that divisions are going out the window this year because it won't be as magnified as, hey, you didn't win your division, and they could still backdoor make the playoffs even if Georgia is or when Georgia continues the success they're on. They could still make the playoffs in that 12-team spot when 3 or 4 SEC teams get in. But at some point, are Tennessee fans, the Tennessee fan base just overall just going to be, hey, we're kind of tired of winning 8, 9 games. Georgia's beaten us now 4 or 5 times in a row. Like, what's the deal? They're a lot better than us across the board on the line of scrimmage. Because I really do think on the offensive line, you go look, heck, I pulled it up right now, but you were on such a good point. Like, I know for a fact, talking to people from Georgia, they had no idea who the hell Nathan Robinson was that Tennessee signed last year. Greenbrier, Tennessee. No offense to Nathan. They just didn't know who he was. Aiden Bustle from Mount Juliet. They didn't know who that was. Trevor Duncan from Knoxville Catholic, who I think Tennessee's projecting as an offensive lineman at 6'5" and a half. They didn't know who those guys were. Like, and that's who Tennessee is bringing in to try to go compete week in, week in. Skill position guys are going to be fine. Even I think on defense, they're going to get better on the back end. But again,
they have to
go back. I just do not see it. Even if these guys hit their ceiling and you're the greatest developer of all time, these guys have such a low ceiling. I don't think it's going to matter.
Well, and I mean, you obviously know better than I do with your background, working for numerous high-level college football programs. But in a lot of ways, elite line prospects they're born, right? They're not really developed. Like, there's things you can work on and improve with them. But, that was one of the kind of points that some folks on Twitter brought up from the Tennessee side was like, well, we had Darnell Wright selected last year as a top 10 pick. And it's like, yeah, he came out of high school as a 5-star as well. Like, we all thought, I mean, like, don't get me wrong, him being a top 10 pick is a great achievement, but there's not some thing about the Heupel system that helped him necessarily develop and become a top 10 pick. He's just physically was born differently than 99.99% of people are walking around on planet Earth. And that's great, but that's also kind of the point, right? Like, you've got to go get those guys. And, the Pruitt tenure went down in flames for a bunch of other reasons, but they were doing a very good job on the recruiting trail. And I'm kind of curious, like, Heupel came in with a reputation as maybe not being the best recruiter. And I think Tennessee's doing a very good job with their NIL stuff right now. And that's allowed them to get in on some high profile recruitments, but it doesn't seem like they're maybe necessarily pushing those resources to players that have the highest position value. Like we were just kind of talking about.
You're 100% right. Like I was mentioning earlier, you bring up Pruitt. They get a lot of flack. I mean, it's kind of perfect timing. We're talking about their ability to recruit. If I remember right, Darnell Wright was a 5. He would have been good at.
Yeah.
You hate saying that. He'd been good anywhere. Like,
right.
He was a highly ranked kid. It's like you said, I don't think it was the Heupel system that got him drafted. The kid just developed and hit his ceiling. But my point, 6 of 8, like I mentioned earlier, are Jeremy Pruitt guys, and they're going into year 3, which I'm interested. I'm still like, all right, so you got. It just goes to show you those guys. It's not saying the Heupel staff can't develop. It's just if you keep recruiting a lower end guy, he can only be so good. And again, at some point it's going to get old for the Tennessee fan base when they continue to lose to Georgia. I mean, it just is, because the 2 games so far since Heupel's been at Tennessee have not really been that close. If you want to be completely honest, Georgia could have beat them a lot worse last year.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think the thing that I referred to a lot on our website on Dog Central, and a lot of my writing about UGA last year was like, Georgia was kind of on this long con throughout 2022. And Monken, was a guy that, like, I'm not going to burn a red zone play on the tape if I don't have to. And that game, you're absolutely right. Like, they got up, they felt very comfortable about where their defense was in that game and having control of it. And from that point on, they basically just ran clock. And then, they went on I think like an 8.5, 9-minute drive in the third quarter. And at that point, the game was effectively over. So I think Tennessee fans right now, they were in the wilderness for so long. And, like, Heupel's done a very good job of bringing that program back to life. And I want to, give him proper credit for that, because, like, this is a step up from where they've been for 15 years now. But I had a buddy that's he creates content for Tennessee, and he was sending me some messages about this whole conversation. He was like, you got to understand, Tennessee fans right now are just really happy to win, 8, 9, or 10 games after everything that's gone
Alabama.
on. Yeah, beating Alabama. It's like, I mean, as soon as they beat Alabama, there was announcements that they were putting out commemorative books on their season last year, which, like, it's telling of kind of what the last 15 years has been like. And I think right now that's great, and they can ride that high, and there's all the support in the world for that staff. But eventually they're going to keep bumping into that ceiling. And I think that system creates a built-in ceiling. And at some point there's going to come the time where it's like, hey, are we going to evolve and try and really become an elite program, or are we just going to kind of, do this system that we run that's really designed to minimize talent disadvantages instead of, being a team with elite levels of talent?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, you take advantage of the defense's lack of communication, or they're not. You got a guy's head turned right there. They're trying to communicate back there, and you snap the ball, and he runs right by your guy. Yeah. And some of it's a credit to Heupel. Like, I think sometimes from just looking at it on social media, you don't want to throw everyone in the pot. It seems like Tennessee fans want the cake and eat it too. From hey, Heupel's doing a great job, but hey, no, we got NFL talent too now. It's not just his. It's a lot of it's a little bit more of a compliment towards him. And like you said, what they've been able to do right now, I think they're hands down the second best program in the East. I mean, for the last year going into the East, I mean, it's Georgia gap, Tennessee gap. And I think Florida, South Carolina, Missouri's teams like Kentucky are trying to catch up to Tennessee. So it's like you said, it's not a bashing Tennessee thing. It's like you said, Tennessee fans, I mean, if they want to be honest, going back to the 90s, early 2000s, they judge themselves on winning championships.
Yeah.
So I think at some point that's going to get old just winning 8-9 games, especially if you stub your toe against Georgia every year and it's starting to rear its ugly head where it's like, oh gosh, yeah, the 23-24 class, once Pruitt's guys got out of here on the trenches, we were not very good.
And that's the question.
At some point that goes back to Glenn Ellerbe, and Rodney Garner has his resume. He's done well, but I mean, he needs to close big on some guys on the interior this year. I mean, you look at those guys. I mean, you are not exaggerating. I encourage anyone to go watch the film and tell me, oh yeah, those guys look like Bear Alexander, Nazir Stackhouse, guys like those guys. I know Jordan Davis is a lowly rated kid that they ended up developing, but it's like you just don't see any of those monsters on the interior, and few teams have them. But,
right.
Yeah.
It's the great separator. Yeah. I mean,
no, you're right.
Yeah, there's a half dozen to a dozen programs at any time that are really landing elite line of scrimmage prospects. And, you know, the scheme flexibility that comes with having those dudes on both sides of the ball is just more than I don't care how good Josh Heupel is at running this system. It's the amount of talent that he's going up against the Georgia. It's too overwhelming. You know, there's so many options that Georgia has from a scheme standpoint in a game against Tennessee that the Vols just don't.
No, you're 100% right. Yeah. It's not an act if they just actually want to take it and be one of those top 3 or 4 teams who actually have a real shot to win the national championship every year here in the next tour. They have to start recruiting better on that side of the ball. Before we get you out of here, Graham, again, I appreciate you joining us. Graham Coffey from dogcentral.com joining us, guys. It's a pleasure. Graham, you're not just a Georgia guy. I know you do a lot of stuff for Georgia, but just a couple questions after media day. After the conclusion of SEC media days from last week, anything change? Anything that happened last week? It kind of changed your thoughts, and not specific just Georgia, just any team in the league that maybe It's like, hey, I think I look at them in a different light now.
I left. Yeah, there's a couple. The first one I would say is I was pleasantly surprised about the vibe around Texas A&M. You know, I still have my questions about Connor Wegman. I think he's a really talented kid, and I thought he, kind of got it done last year in the right moments. Like some of the raw tape from a throw-to-throw basis wasn't superb, but he's also a freshman getting thrown to the wolves in November in the SEC, so very understandable. I'm just curious to see, what – like there was the controversy of Fisher not answering the question on who's going to call plays. Everyone around that program feels like it's pretty obvious that Bobby Petrino is going to call the plays. But, the thing that left me kind of with a positive taste in my mouth around A&M was I was around when Aniyah Smith, their wide receiver, was doing one of his media availability with a scrum of reporters. And someone asked him, why haven't you guys been able to turn all of this talent into – really taking that next step and being someone that's competing for division championships, conference championships, et cetera. And he was like, look, we went through COVID, and then this new NIL thing happened, and we brought all these guys in, and like, they weren't really concerned about winning football games. They were concerned about them, and their families were concerned about making NIL money. And like it eroded our culture, and we had guys that didn't want to go to class, and just, kind of saying out loud what I think we all suspected about that class that they signed that was the highest ranked of all time at the time. And, they've weeded a lot of those guys out, but you go across the roster, there's still Evan Stewart. There is still Aniyah Smith. They've got studs across the defensive line, which we just talked about. Like, there's only a few programs that do. And so I just think the ceiling for them is very high. And whatever you think of Bobby Petrino personally, I like you said, like I covered Georgia, so he's not really well thought of in the state of Georgia with the way he left the Falcons back in the day. Yeah. But the guy can call ball plays. Like, he knows how to dial it up. Like last year at Missouri State, like he had Arkansas on the ropes. He found something in their tape, and he exploited it for 3.5 quarters and almost won that football game on the road in Fayetteville. So I think that, like, I'm a little high on them. And the West is so competitive that it's always hard to predict, but there's part of me that's, it's like they get Bama at home. Like they've got a kind of favorable schedule for an SEC West team. And I think that they might surprise some people and pop up and, be looking at like a 10-win type team when we get to November.
Yeah, it's like I feel like I say it on my show that it's like their talent's going to catch up to them at some point in a good way. I mean, as long as people can stay at it. I mean, there's a lot of bright offensive minds in that offensive staff room. I mean, Bobby Petrino's developed Lamar Jackson, Ryan Mallett, even Tyler Wilson back in his day was good when Bobby Petrino was there. Steve Adazio has been around some good offensive staffs. And then a guy you're familiar with, under the radar, Jim Chaney's an analyst who I've heard has had a lot of input on kind of what they're going to do. So I think their offense, from like you say, you talk to people, they feel pretty good, I think, about their offense. I think Wigman's kind of one of those guys, they kind of think it's a gamer. Like motion's not going to be overly pretty or fluid. It's going to look ugly, but at times, like you said, the guy's going to be – and he didn't throw an interception last year. 3 or 4 games thrown into a bad situation, 6 different offensive line combinations. It's like you said, still some question marks with him, but there's some clay to mold if you're Bobby Petrino, Jimbo Fisher, kind of like there with them. Other question I had for you. What's kind of the feel, though, circling back, taking the 35,000-foot view, heading back to Athens, what's kind of the feel around the program this summer? Just in your opinion, outside of all the driving stuff, like just from a football standpoint, what's kind of the feel on the team?
I think there's a kind of a quiet internal confidence there where I think Georgia feels very good about what they have. I would say the biggest X and O question for Georgia is replacing Jalen Carter, which you're not going to do. But like you mentioned Stackhouse earlier, and they've signed a bunch of other studs over the last few cycles that are in that room with him. But which of those guys are really going to be the ones that step up and go from being kind of like 12 to 15 snaps a game type guys to like 30 to 40 snaps a game like Stackhouse played last year? And, you've got Tyron Ingram-Dawkins, who is lined up all across the line of scrimmage at different times, was a 5-star kid. Athletically, they love him. There's always been kind of that question of like, is he going to take the leap? So very interested to see him. Warren Brinson, another highly rated kid out of IMG on that defensive line. And then they signed Jamal Jarrett and Jordan Hall, who were 2 of those defensive line prospects in the last cycle who are legit, 310 plus pound kids. And Jarrett's like a true zero tech. I mean, he's like 350. And I don't think they need those guys to be studs right away, but like if Georgia, with what they have at inside linebacker and the athleticism there, can get a guy like Jarrett to play 15, 20 snaps a game as a good zero tech and occupy some double teams in the interior, then the things that opens up for Smile Mondon and Jamon Dumas-Johnson to do from the linebacker position are exciting from a defending the run standpoint and a pressure package standpoint. So I think that's the spot I'm curious about on defense. And then on the offensive side of the ball, it's Mike Bobo. There's all the history there with Georgia and him. He's back. Georgia has been, I would say Kirby Smart is kind of stressed as much as possible this offseason of like, hey, we're not changing, our terminology. Like, I think that Kirby has kind of gone the Saban route where, the Georgia offense now is the Georgia offense. And if you get hired to be OC at Georgia, then you come in and run the Georgia playbook and you add your own wrinkles to it. So, there's not a terminology system change for the quarterbacks, but Todd Monken was very good in 2 close college football playoff games at pulling the right cards down the stretch. And Georgia came up and won those games in the fourth quarter against Alabama in 21 and Ohio State in 22. And that was the difference in them being back-to-back national champions and, a 41-year drought of not winning a title. So you don't know what that's going to look like until we see Bobo in a spot like that. And I think that's the same question for Carson Beck, right? Like, I think he's the guy with the inside track on the starting job for them at quarterback, but all the talent in the world. I think a guy who, has kind of learned how to have the right work habits over the last couple of years and is really sort of built up throughout his career to get ready for this moment. And I think physically, mentally ready to take advantage of it. But again, it's just until we see him in a situation where, they're in a close game or they're in a spot like they were against Missouri last year where things start out bad and they're a little shell shocked and maybe there's an early turnover or two and all of a sudden, you're on the road in the SEC with a rabid crowd and you're down 10 points. How does he respond to that? Until I see it, I can't know, but everything else seems to line up well for them. I mean, they had over half the guys on the first team all SEC defense last week at media days. Like, the talent is not a question.
Well, Graham, you took two of my questions I was going to ask you. I'm
sorry.
glad you hit on it. No. I'm glad you hit on it. You hit it all in one. The Mike Bobo transition. And then, is it really Carson Beck's job right now? Or do you think there's kind of a quarterback competition going in a little bit with Vandegrift and Stockton? I think it's a little bit with Carson Beck. It reminds me, you mentioned that, because I've heard the same thing too about him maturing. It kind of reminds me of Mac Jones's maturation process a little bit. He kind of got a DUI his first year at Alabama. I think he was a kid. It kind of was in the background. Kind of had Jalen Tuall in front of him. He was kind of taking a back, but matured towards the end and kind of put it all in the field. And you saw it in the 2020 season. I firmly think Carson Beck would be a great Heisman sleeper right now, because he's going to have all the success set up in front of him with the support staff, especially with him bringing in Dominic Lovett, Ra Thomas, guys like that, and then 3 starters back in the offensive line, and Mims has starting experience. So I kind of like him as my under the radar Heisman candidate now. But I wanted to ask you, so you think he will be? You'd be shocked if it was anyone else taking snaps
at this point? Yeah, I mean, I would be very, very shocked if he's not the starting quarterback for them come opening day and throughout the year. Really, I think something would have to really not translate between what they're seeing in practice and what goes on in games. But he is a streaky player. Like, that's always been kind of his reputation in scrimmages. Like last, in spring practice of 2022, I was talking to some folks close to the program, and they were like, for the last week, like, Carson's out throwing Stetson. Like, he's doing things that Stetson's not right now. And then he kind of would go cold. And so I think that's maybe the biggest concern you have about him is, does he hit a cold stretch at some point, the wrong time in the middle of a game? But there is so many easy things that Georgia's doing on offense now, from, in the screen game and with RPOs and such, that, like, I think that will help him out. They're not going to ask him to make a ton of difficult throws for the offense to work. Like, he can make those at times, but that won't be the bread and butter of what they do with that offensive line there. They'll have a good running game, but I think it's definitely his job. And I think that the battle really in the camp for Georgia at the quarterback position is probably going to be between Stockton and Vandegrift for that number 2 job, because I think Stockton has kind of come on over the last year, and from what I've heard, he's had some really impressive 7-on-7 sessions in the offseason, and it's going to be interesting to see when they actually get into some padded, real scrimmages this fall. Can he continue with that momentum? And what happens with Vandegrift in that case? But I like the Mac Jones comparison for Beck. Another one that I've thought of was kind of Zach Mettenberger, in terms of, Carson never had any like off-field issue type stuff, but a really toolsy player, right? Like, big kid, big arm, always, was liked by scouts just for the physical attributes, but took a little while for it all to come together. But once it did, it was impressive.
Yeah. And last question, kind of 2 in 1 before we get you out of here again. Appreciate you joining us. If you had to say, outside of the Tennessee game in late November, what is it, November 18th, I think, to be exact, or the second to last week of the year, outside of that game, what game worries you the most on the Georgia schedule? And if I told you Georgia did not win the national championship, what would be the main reason why, in your opinion?
So outside of Tennessee, I would think maybe Kentucky. They do get Kentucky at home, but Kentucky held them to 30 points in 2021, and then they held them into the teens last year and kind of made that game close. Or maybe it was the low 20s, but Kentucky and Georgia continue every year to play these like kind of old school slugfest physical style games, and that tends to keep the game close. And so I think Kentucky kind of does some things on defense that maybe is better than pretty much anyone else Georgia's faced over the last couple seasons. And then they've got Leary at quarterback now, and that might add a little more. I think they'll be a little more dynamic on offense than they've been the last couple of years because I like their receiving core a lot. But if Georgia doesn't win the national title, I mean, I think at the end of the day, like, you got to have some luck to win one national title. And I think you could argue they were not lucky to win the title last year, but like they didn't have, a really terrible injury that decimated them in the middle of the season. Like, those types of things in college football are so key. And so, I think one would be maybe they don't stay as healthy as they have the last couple of years. And then I think the other would just be, Alabama was in a position to do this in 2013 and the kick six happened, right? Like, this is a crazy sport. The athletes are so good, but they're also kids. So they're prone to being in the wrong place at the wrong time and, the mental lapse or whatever. And you just might not get the bounce of the ball. Maybe this time, the kicker hits that 50-yarder at the buzzer instead of hooking it wide.
Like you said, little stuff that you're not even thinking about this time of year right now. Like you said, injuries down the line. Where's everybody at in late November or something like that? Yeah, you're right. But, Graham, I appreciate you joining us, man. Everybody, Graham Coffee.
It's a pleasure.
Dog Central. Appreciate you joining us, man. Great conversation. Keep it up, man. I follow you. Get some intel from you, man. Appreciate you joining us again. You have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, man. Enjoy what you're doing.
Appreciate it, man. Perfect. We appreciate Graham coming on to join us, guys. Remember, he is the co-founder and publisher over at dogcentral.com. You can get a lot of intel from them. I believe them and Rusty Mansell over there at Dogs HQ over there on On3 are some of the best in the country at providing a lot of Georgia intel and also some SEC intel, as you could tell from us talking about a little SEC Media Days. But flipping over, who has a real shot, a real honest shot of making the college football playoff this upcoming 2023 season from the SEC? It's probably not as many as you think, and there's probably a little surprise here. But this list may surprise you. It's a little bit of a combination of talent, continuity on staff, and just projecting some development. I think in our preseason predictions, I always like to project, and it's probably going to leave me out to dry a little bit because my projections could be wrong. But I think it's just kind of boring just to go off last year. Let's make some predictions. So it's going to go off that. But again, not many teams have a real shot. Making the college football, the 14 playoff, honestly, the group of teams who could win the national championship is totally different than the group that could even make the playoffs. I think there's only about 3 or 4 teams that even could have who have a chance going into the season to win it all. I think teams like a Georgia, I think Michigan, getting to Alabama, LSU, and Ohio State, that may be it. And I think you can maybe take off Alabama or LSU. Because I'm saying once you even get to the playoffs, you're going to have to go beat a really good elite team in the playoffs and then go do it again in the national championship. I'm not just taking your first 12 or your first 13 if you're playing in a conference title. I'm talking about you going over and winning in the playoffs and then winning the national championship. There's only 3 or 4 teams who can do that going into the season. I know everybody's like, well, Tulane could do it. They got Michael Pratt back. No, they can't. No offense to Tulane. Good squad. I think Ole Miss is going to go in there and make a statement this year against them. I think a lot of people predicted Ole Miss to lose that game. I don't see it. But it comes down to what this whole episode is really about. Winning on the line is a scrimmage. There's only so many freaks up front. There's only so many teams, 3 or 4, really have those kind of guys that can go lead you to a national championship. But let's get right to it. Here are the teams. I'm not going to give you a number yet. I'm going alphabetical, not by rank, that have a chance from the SEC to make the 2023 college football playoff. First, the University of Alabama, and why? I'll give you 4 reasons here. Strong run game. If you've been living under a rock, Tommy Rees, Alabama hired him. Nick Saban feels real comfortable in him or comfortable with him. They both have similar beliefs on how they want to use this offense that's going to start up front. They want to lean on the run game. They got a deep running back core. Jace McClellan, Roydell Williams. I think Justice Haynes is going to have a big say as a true freshman. Jam Miller. I like Alabama's backfield. I do. And I think they got 3 starters back on the offensive line that are winnable plus guys that can be serviceable. Just got to be committed to it. I also think the new rule changes. The NFL style now where the clock does no longer stops after first downs unless it's within 2 minutes at the end of a half. That's going to help Alabama. It's also going to limit a lot of There's not going to be as many comebacks anymore. There's not going to be any Mississippi State coming back 28-3 on the road at Auburn. That wouldn't happen. With that, the clock's going to be running. That's wasted possession. Or it's not wasted. It's just going to be limiting possessions. I think Alabama moving to the run game is perfect timing. And it's a strategy. It's a chess, not checkers move by Nick Saban. I like it. I mean, I like that. I think it's a real shot. They're going to be a little different. They're not going to have, if it's Ty Simpson, Jalen Milroe, or Tyler Buckner, it's not going to be Tua. It's not going to be Mac Jones. It's not going to be Bryce Young. So I think they're changing it at the perfect time. Next, I think Kevin Steele. He's real familiar. He knows his way around the Malmore facility. He's been the DPP there. Saban's first DC there. He's been the linebackers coach there. He knows his way around those halls at the Malmore facility. And then according to Pick Six Previews and Bama Online's Clint Lamb of On 3, listen to this stat. Steele's defensive rosters had just 7 top 100 players at Clemson. When he was the DC at Clemson, only 7 top 100 players. At LSU, he only had 9 when he was there in 2015. Yep, 2015 with Les Miles. When he was at Auburn and he saved Gus Malzahn's job for another 2 or 3 years, he only had 7 at Auburn. But at Alabama, he inherits 38. Now, if you've listened to the show, you know I've been hard on Alabama. I think they've missed in a lot of key positions, specifically in the trenches on the offensive line, defensive line, what this episode was built on. It's all coming together, all my stuff tying together here. It's a trench episode. 38, and he had some good defenses at Auburn. He lets his athletes go play. He simplifies it. Keep it simple, stupid. That's what Kevin Steele does. Lets his high-octane defensive players elite. Don't let them think. Don't just sit there and let they're playing slow. Paralysis analysis. Stuff like that. You got to let your guys go play. I think Kevin Steele's going to do a great job like that. And he's not afraid to go tell Nick Saban probably some stuff that Nick Saban doesn't want to hear. From what I heard, that was a little bit of Pete Golden's issue. Kevin Steele has had numerous knockout, drag-out fights with Nick Saban before in staff meetings. He's not scared to give him his peace of mind. And their defensive philosophies are a little different now because Kevin Steele's been away. Pete Golden was almost too similar to Nick Saban. So I think Kevin Steele, along with the run games, are 2 big reasons why Alabama can make a playoff push. Also, this isn't talked about enough. The next one, Will Reichard, the kicker. You're bringing in a new OC, bringing in a new quarterback. You need almost a guaranteed 3 points because you're going to struggle a little bit initially in the red zone. And I think that's why Alabama's vulnerable to potentially losing to Texas early. But Will Reichard, he's going to be big. It's not talked about enough. Like I said, you're bringing in a new quarterback, new OC. You're going to stall out in the red zone a little bit. But if he can get him inside the 40-yard line, he's almost automatic. I mean, last year he finished 22 of 26 and went 13 of 14 within 40. That's going to be massive. Not enough people when you think about that. You also never really think about your kicker until you're in games. Fans really don't until we're in the fall, until we're in the months of September through December. You just don't really think about it. He misses a kick. Like, dang, we should have won that game. Well, you never talked about your kicker going into the year. You didn't really think about that. So Will Reichard would be another reason why Alabama is another team in the SEC has a real shot of making the college football playoffs. Then finally, the schedule. This was last year's schedule, and they're going on the road to Texas, going on the road to Tennessee, going on the road to Baton Rouge. I think this team's a 9-10 win team. I'll be honest with you. But they get Texas at home. They get Tennessee at home. They get LSU at home. Now, they do go to A&M. They do go to Auburn. But again, their toughest games, though in Arkansas if you want, it's another home game. Their toughest games, Ole Miss as well, their toughest games are at home this year. The schedule benefits, this was last year, but not feel near as comfortable. So those are the 4 reasons why I feel good about Alabama making or having a real shot, a real honest shot to make the college football playoff in the SEC. Strong run game. Tommy Rees, Nick Saban, perfect marriage. Kevin Steele knows his way around the block in the Mount Moore facility, not afraid to tell Nick Saban some stuff he doesn't want to hear. And he's going to let his players play. Keep it simple, stupid. Will Reichard, underrated, best kicker in the SEC. Bama's offense is going to be, it is what it is, especially early in the season. They're probably going to stall out a little bit in the red zone. They need to at least feel comfortable they're going to get 3 points once they get within 40 yards. And then finally, the schedule. The tough games are all at home. So Alabama, I think those are the 4 reasons why they have a real shot of making the college football playoff coming out of the SEC. Obviously, the talent's there too. But next, remember, alphabetical order. The Georgia Bulldogs. I don't think there's going to be a big drop-off at quarterback. We talked about it a little bit with Graham. Carson Beck has overall more ability than Stetson Bennett. You heard Graham talk about it a little bit. Some days Carson Beck was the best quarterback in that quarterback room last year at Georgia, including Stetson Bennett, but he just wasn't as consistent. I think he's going to be a big riser in this league. He's going to be surrounded by a good support cast. I mean, you got Ladd McConkey, Marcus Rosemead, Jack Saint. They brought in Ra Thomas from Mississippi State, Dominic Lovett, a slot receiver, can take the top off of defense from Missouri. Throw in Brock Bowers. He's got weapons. And then a running back by committee. 3 offensive starters coming back, really 4 if you want to throw in Amarius Mims. He started a few games. It's a perfect setup. Again, sleeper Heisman pick, Carson Beck. You heard it here first. I think he's going to be fine. Then the front 7, I think it's going to continue to be nasty. They returned 3 of my top 15 defenders in the league. In that front 7, Michael Williams, the freak, Small Munden and Demas Johnson. I mean, Munden and Demas Johnson were their number 1 and number 2 tacklers last year. A lot of people don't feel good about their inside linebacker position in depth right there, but Georgia does. They're getting both their top 2 leading tacklers back. I think the front 7, I expect guys like Nazir Stackhouse to really step up, take that next step. A little depth maybe on the interior could be an issue, but I think the front 7 is going to be a real reason why. Their ability to run the football in the offensive line and their ability to stop the run like they've done the entire time under Kirby Smart and Glenn Schumann in that front 7 and throwing Will Muschamp too. I think that's going to be good as well. I don't think it's going to be as big of a drop-off. Now, they don't have the depth of the proven guys on the outside, placing Nolan Smith, but I think they'll be fine. I think they're going to be fine. So I think their front 7 on defense is going to continue to be nasty. The next reason, depth. Georgia's always going to be replacing big contributors. I mean, either guys are out of eligibility, leaving early for the draft. We see it every year. But Georgia, especially on defense, rotates their personnel. Like I said, especially on defense, more than any other team. So usually there are guys that weren't contributors, but were, again, in that top 40. It's not about your top 22. A lot of top 22s can compete with everybody, but that top 40, and Georgia's got the best top 40 in the country. They have guys that have also got 12 to 14 snaps. That this isn't just going to be jumping in the pool for the first time for them. They've gotten their feet wet. They know the temperature of that water. So Georgia, I think the depth is going to be a big reason why. They got better depth than everyone in the country right now. So I think depth will be a big one. These backups are not your usual first-time starters. And then finally, the schedule. After dropping the Oklahoma game, not their fault, the SEC made them do it, Georgia doesn't have a hard schedule. Again, I think their hardest game is going to be at Tennessee in late November. Other than that, we asked Graham. Kentucky's a good one. Kentucky's been battling them, but that's at home. South Carolina's at home. At Auburn, maybe first SEC road game for a starter like Carson Beck, Hugh Freeze, good head coach. It'll be a raucous environment at Jordan-Hare. It's interesting as well. But again, the schedule, really, this is one of the easier schedules I've ever seen an elite team, especially a team that's going for a potential three-peat, ever have. I would be shocked if Georgia lost one of their first 12. So with that said, why Georgia's a playoff contender? Besides obviously the top 40 talent, recruiting the best year of the past 5 or 6 years, there's not going to be a drop-off at quarterback. I think Carson Beck is an under-the-radar Heisman contender. The front 7's not going to take too much of a drop-off. They just got to find some guys on the edge. They got their top 2 tacklers back, and Small Munden and Demas Johnson. Depth, Georgia's, again, I mentioned it, top 40 better. Top 40 is better than any other team in the country. There are guys who are stepping into starter positions. Georgia plays a lot of guys on defense. This is not going to be just jumping into the pool. They're going to understand the temperature, like I talked about. And then schedule. It's just not very hard. It's one of the least challenging schedules I've seen for a really elite team. And it's not Georgia's fault, but it just is what it is. So that's why I feel good. And those are 4 reasons, 4 of the top reasons why I think Georgia has a real shot at making the college football playoff again. Moving on, we're back to the SEC West alphabetical order. The LSU Tigers, the defending SEC West champs. First, Jaden Daniels. After SEC media days, I'm all bought in this guy. Real mature kid. He admitted there was an adjustment period last year in the league. And I think everybody knew that who watched the games. But it seems he understands not there's an adjustment from a mental standpoint, from a physical standpoint, because he was a slight, slender build guy, more of a linear build guy. If you remember, a little bit of some narrow shoulders. Everybody questioned if he could take the hits on him. He's added more weight. He's gotten stronger in the offseason. He is very aware of that. This is all coming after a very good first year at LSU. I mean, he went 17 touchdowns, only 3 interceptions. But once he got comfortable taking off, making plays with his feet, like you saw at the end of the Alabama game, he was a dangerous weapon. Incorporate him into the run game. If that offensive line can take the next step with a running back by committee, look out. I think Jaden Daniels, again, like Carson Beck, I think those guys are easily, I think by the end of the year, we'll be talking both those 2 dudes will be top 4 quarterbacks. But Jaden Daniels, just impressive. I think he takes the next step. You got to think, this is one of my key points. He's got his quarterback coach, Joe Sloan, and he's got his offensive coordinator, Mike Denbrock, both back. That's critical. That's critical for a quarterback's development in his second season. So I like Jaden Daniels. Offensive line. taking that next step, like I mentioned, offensive coordinator Mike Denbrock kept mixing it up and matching offensive line combinations last season and finally settled on both true freshman offensive linemen next year or last year, both sophomores to be Will Campbell and Emory Jones. Let them settle in at those tackle spots. And that's when LSU got real comfortable. Add in the fact both Miles Frazier and Garrett Dellinger, feels like he's been at LSU forever, are both back. And this unit gets a year older, and I think they start developing under Brad Davis, offensive line coach at LSU. I think that next year of development, a lot of continuity. Everyone's back on the offensive line, on the offensive staff for LSU. So I think that continuity is big. And then I think it's going to be big for them to establish a run because I don't think they have a dude in that running back room. I mean, I think Logan Diggs is going to be a good player for him. Josh Williams, former walk-on's a serviceable guy, but no real dude that you're used to seeing with LSU, like a Leonard Fournette, Darius guys like that. They don't have it, but I think the committee's good enough to win, especially if the offensive line takes that next step. So for LSU to make the playoffs, that offensive line is going to have to take that next step, not only to protect Jaden Daniels, but to also get that run game going. And then throw in, I think Jaden Daniels is going to be incorporated in that run game, especially with the added mass and weight he has put on in the offseason. But that offensive line's got to take that next step. But I think they will. A good year of growth. And once they settled into that combination with both Emory Jones and Will Campbell holding it on the outside, you can tell they got real comfortable. And then finally, you heard me talk about it a little bit with the Jaden Daniels and the offensive line and the offensive staff at LSU. Continuity. You have your quarterback, your offensive coordinator, and your defense coordinator, and obviously your head coach, Brian Kelly, all back. A lot of teams can't say that. The only coach they lost was defensive line coach Jamar Cain left to take a job in the NFL. Who was he with? I think he's in Denver with Sean Payton and the Broncos. That's where he went. They hired Jimmy Lindsey, who was the defensive line coach at South Carolina last year. They only have one coach to replace this offseason. Strength and conditioning coach is back. I looked it up. So a lot of continuity. I think that's big. So going back to LSU, why they have a great chance of going to the college football playoffs, Jaden Daniels, I think, is a top 2 quarterback in this league for sure, if not the best. He's the best going into the season right now. May not finish there, but definitely top 2, floor top 4. I think he'll be a big reason. Maturity. Offensive line takes that next step. Like I mentioned, Emory Jones, Will Campbell, Garrett Dellinger, Miles Frazier. Guys, it's another year of all 4 of those guys playing together. And then continuity. Just the overall continuity from the offensive line, from the whole staff. They want to replace one coach. That was the defensive line coach. But I like what LSU is doing overall. And then finally, I mentioned 3. I'm sorry, I repeat that. The front 7 on defense. I missed that one. Sorry, I wanted to go the front 7. If the Tigers can stay injury-free up front, especially on the interior, I think talking to some guys, they don't really like the overall depth there, but between Mekhi Wingo, Mason Smith, they can stay healthy. LSU's going to be fine. They're going to be fine. Throwing additions from the portal, Ovi Ogufo, who transferred in from Texas, Jordan Jefferson from West Virginia, and then you have some depth. If those guys can stay healthy, you have some depth. And obviously, LSU's best teams, so we all remember, we go back in the time when Nick Saban, Les Miles, even Edwards, they have dominant fronts on both lines of scrimmage, and that's what we've been talking about this episode, dominant fronts in the trenches. We obviously know about Harold Perkins, but watch out for Oregon State transfer Omar Speights. I hear great things about him. And then 2022 tackle leader Greg Penn, he's back. If they can stay healthy, LSU's front 7 is going to be a top 2 front 7 in the SEC. You can guarantee it. And if this unit can improve somewhat, this will be a tremendous asset to the back end, who's a bunch of new guys, some transfer portal guys. If they can get to the quarterback, affect him, not sack him. It's like Nick Saban said, it's not all about sacks, it's about affecting the quarterback. If guys like Savion Jones on the back on the edge, if Harold Perkins on 3rd down, like he did at the end of the year, started taking over games, can get to the quarterback, that's going to help those guys on the back end and make that secondary look a lot better. So it's all going to come down for LSU, I think, to that front 7. So again, Jaden Daniels, continuity on the staff, front 7 on defense, and the offensive line taking that next step. LSU will be in the playoffs. And then finally, call me crazy, Tennessee fans are going to think this is just a Tennessee bashing episode, and it is not. I think Tennessee's doing a great job. They're going to be a solid 8-10 win team, but I don't think this year you're a college football playoff team. And that's what I'm going to get blasted for, is not putting them in here. But the 4th team and the final team, the Texas A&M Fighting Aggies. Why? Bobby Petrino is the best thing Connor Weigman never asked for. He did not sign with A&M knowing Bobby Petrino would be his offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach. He thought that would be Jimbo Fisher, and to an extent it still is. But you can call Bobby Petrino a lot of things, but not a developer of the quarterback position is not one. He developed Ryan Mallett at Arkansas, Tyler Wilson at Arkansas, coached Heisman Trophy winner Lamar Jackson at Louisville. Those are just a few to take off, just off the top of my head. Connor Wigman, with more of a gamer style. People like he's a better in-game. I saw some people compare to Johnny Manziel. I'm not doing that. But a little bit of a gamesmanship. It comes on when the lights are on. I mean, last year, the kid had 8 touchdowns, 0 interceptions in a bad situation. Not 100% sold on him. I think he could easily be a top 6, top 7 quarterback in this league when it's all said and done. But I do like what he's doing, and I think with Bobby Petrino developing him, did Bobby Petrino ask for a better mold of clay or a better piece of clay to mold heading into his first season in College Station? I don't think so. So I like the combination of Bobby Petrino and Connor Wigman. Second, egos are going to have to be pushed to the side. There's plenty of talent for Texas A&M to have one of the better offenses in the entire league. But as they say, is that you or your ego? We all have one, and especially people who are competitive and strive for greatness all have egos. I don't want to work with you or play with you if you don't have an ego, because that means you just don't really care. I think egos are important, but you have to check them at the door. If I was a head coach, that would be on this at the top of our staff room, heading into the staff room before staff meetings. Check your ego at the door. Let's go with the best idea. Best idea wins. But listen to these minds we have in this room if they can check the egos. Offensive minds. Jimbo Fisher, Bobby Petrino, Steve Adazio, and I think one of the most valuable analysts and has been an SEC coordinator of this league, 3 different schools off the top of my head at Arkansas, Tennessee, and at Georgia. Jim Chaney, who's with the Saints last year. Great offensive mind. They can all get on the same page, take little pieces from their brain and bring it all together. Look out, but the egos have to be checked at the door. And then the injury bug. It's got to stay away from the trenches on both lines of scrimmages last year. On the offensive line, defensive line were decimated by injuries. 3 starters were lost to season-ending injuries. I'm looking at right now on the offensive line. And the staff had to use 6 different offensive line combinations. You're just not going to play winning football like that. It's a miracle Wigman went 8-0 in touchdown interception ratio. It's nuts when you really talk about that. 6 different offensive line combination for a true freshman. So I got high hopes for Connor Wigman. On defense, starting ends Fidel Diggs and Tamisha Adeli, who's transferred to Michigan State, were lost for the season, and it made younger guys like Walter Nolan, Shamar Stewart, and L.T. Overton, Levis Overton, had to grow up quick, and they were just freshmen up front in the defensive line in the SEC. I don't care if you were a 5-star, the number 1 player in the country, best player ever. There's going to be an adjustment period. But these guys are a year older, and they're probably closer to being juniors reps-wise than they are sophomores going into this season. And then the dominant 2022 defensive line class, like I said, it's just a year older. I like the way these guys got a lot of reps last year. I mean, you saw them against LSU last year. I think that's a game we forget about. I'm a little bit higher on A&M than some other people. As you can tell, I put them as a top 4 team to make the playoffs in the SEC, and I left Tennessee out. So I'm higher on them than most, but they've got to stay healthy. And then finally, the run defense must improve. I think DJ Durkin's going to improve this defense in his second year at Texas A&M. He did the same thing at Ole Miss. They were not very good his first year in 2020 at Ole Miss, but took a big step in 2021. Durkin needs to take the Kevin Steele approach. Take a page out of Coach Steele's page at Alabama and keep it simple, stupid. Try to line up guys in perfect fits. You're talented, Coach Durkin. Let your guys go play. Keep it simple, stupid. I expect a much improved unit this year from what I'm hearing, because it's another year in the system, and I believe they have simplified that system. And like I said, there's a history of DJ Durkin. There's a history of DJ Durkin showing tremendous improvement in his second year. Go back and look at his stats from 2020 to 2021 when he was at Ole Miss. So going back to Texas A&M, 4 ways they're going to make the playoffs that I feel confident, and these are 4 things they'll have to do. It's Bobby Petrino and Connor Wigman are going to have to develop with each other. Bobby Petrino is going to have to develop Connor Wigman tremendously, and I think it's there. I think if Bobby Petrino, from what I hear, laid back. He's really embracing this offensive coordinator role. I think something's big there. Egos, and to be pushed to the side. There's a lot of great offensive minds in that offensive staff room that I mentioned. They can all come together for the overall betterment of the organization. Look out. I think A&M's offense is going to be fine. I'm just going to tell you that right now. Injury, and every team in the country can say that. But no team was decimated on the offensive line and defensive line like A&M was last year. They have to stay healthy. And then finally, the run defense has to improve tremendously. DJ Durkin's tweaked it a little bit. Second year going in, I feel more confident a little bit about that. And I'll be honest with you, I have more concerns about A&M on defense than I do offensively. Call me crazy. Call me crazy with that. But those are the 4 teams I think going into the 2023 season have real chances, real honest chances of making the college football playoff. Alabama, Georgia, LSU, and Texas A&M. That's all alphabetically, no specific order. Tennessee, I think there'll be a little bit of a drop off this year. Closer 9-3 team. I don't think they're really going to have a real shot to get in the playoffs this year. Maybe I'm wrong. I just don't feel it. I think the talent level is going to drop off a little bit there. I just don't think they're going to be in it. I don't think the defense is going to improve that much. And I think there's going to be a little bit of a drop off offensively just because I think Hendon Hooker was perfect for that system. I think Joe Milton's going to turn it over a little bit more. And I think losing a guy in that system, not from an NFL standpoint, in this system, a guy like Jalen Hyatt and Cedric Tillman, I think, will be losses a little bit. But they got Brew McCoy. But again, I don't think Tennessee is I don't know if they're going to adjust that well to having the target on their back this year and actually be in the 100. And again, I'm probably going to predict Tennessee to win for sure the floor 8 wins, and I'm leaning towards 9. So I think Tennessee's going to be good, but I just don't think playoff good. But to wrap up the show, let's get to some of the fan questions here. Let me pull them up. One was a little bit more personal off the top of my head here. Let's run through it. Give a shout out to the fans giving us the questions. All right, fan questions. Here we go. Leading off with Josh Diaz at the Joshy D. Pancakes or waffle, guys? Random question, but hey, you asked. I'm going to go waffle. A little bit lighter on the stomach. I'm a big Waffle House guy. A little bit lighter on the stomach. I usually don't get either. It probably depends who's making it. But if I had to pick, I'm going to go waffle because I'm a big Waffle House guy. It's a little bit lighter on the stomach. So I'm more of a waffle guy, loaded up with syrup, put a little bit of butter on there, wrap it up, baby. And then finally from Blank Edie at Blank Edie, will any underdog stand out this year in the SEC? All about context, defining stuff. Like what is considered an underdog? I guess some people would say my A&M pick, but I think A&M's so talented that I keep saying it on the show. I mentioned it to Graham. The talent's going to catch up to them in a good way this year. So I'm not really considering them an underdog. I've seen some other people pick them a true underdog. That's probably a team that has a ceiling of 7-8 wins. It could probably exceed it. If Auburn has 8 wins heading into the Iron Bowl, that game's always hell. It's a war in Tuscaloosa, especially if it's a decent Auburn team, especially under Nick Saban at Alabama. I can't remember the last time Alabama actually just drug. I've talked about it before. Auburn in Jordan Hare, probably 2011, truly. But I know some people got Auburn picked to finish last in the West. I probably lean Auburn. Some people say maybe Kentucky would hit that. I think Kentucky or Auburn. I'll lean Auburn. Auburn, I think, it's going to be a little bit better than people think. I think Hugh Freeze always has a pretty good offense, quarterback-friendly system. I'll go Auburn. I think Auburn's an underdog that could be projected to finish, a true underdog. It could be projected to finish last in their division and finish closer to maybe 4th. So I'm going to go Auburn. But I appreciate the question, both questions by Josh Diaz and Blake Edie. I appreciate both those questions. But I appreciate you joining us on this episode of Mach 10 Sports. We covered on why Tennessee is not quite there, or they need to improve a little bit to get better on both lines of scrimmages to actually compete for championships. Because I think at some point it's going to get a little old just winning 8-9 games. If you can never get over that Georgia monster, you keep stubbing your toe in Athens or Knoxville when Georgia comes to town. I think they have to get better recruiting up front. Where I said 6 out of their 8 too deep on their defensive line and linebackers are Pruitt recruited guys. So I think they got to get better, start hitting on some of these big-time guys. They're hitting on skills, running back guys, receiver. I mean, I'm a big fan of the Mike Matthews guys. I think they're hitting Nico. They're going to always have quarterback and skill guys. But the true championships, like I said, there's only 3 or 4 teams that are truly national championship contenders. Tennessee wants to get into that conversation and even the SEC championship conversation and to start recruiting better up front. And that's not to say they can't make the 12-team playoff, but truly winning the national championship, it's different. They're going to have to step up the recruiting a bit on both sides of the line of scrimmage, if not a lot. We also talked about the 4 teams, in my opinion, from the SEC that have real honest shots at making the college football playoff. I told you Alabama, Georgia, LSU, and the shocker, Texas A&M. And then finally answer some fan questions. But we're going to go again on Thursday. It's about that time, guys. 5 more Saturdays. Fall camp starting at the end of next week. Another week and a half for practices. Reports start coming, baby. And then Scout School with Josh Murphy from Recruiting 101 will be this upcoming Thursday. But again, I appreciate you joining us on this episode of Mach 10 Sports. Hope you have a great week.